B'siyata d'shmaya, we're going to learn Pesachim Daf Kuv Daled. We're actually in the middle of a story. On Daf Kuv Gimel Amud Aleph, we saw that Rabbi Yaakov bar Abba was visiting Rava. He visited him on Shabbos, and then he saw the way that he made a hagofen after the Birchas Hamazon, and that became a discussion. And then he saw how he made Havdalah, and how his servant took a single nair, a candle, and lit a larger flame from it. And then Rabbi Yaakov saw noticed the text that Rava used, the formula of Havdalah that Rava used, and that's something which we're going to discuss in today's shiur. Posach v'omar, 8 lines from the bottom of Daf Kuf Gimel Amud Beis. Rabbi Yaakov saw that Rava, when he said his Havdalah, he started the bracha of Hamavdil as follows: Hamavdil ben kodesh lechoil, that Hashem separates between holiness and choil, chulin, ben or lachoshech, ben light and dark, ben Yisrael lo'amim, between Klal Yisrael and the nations, ben yoim hashvi'i l'sheishes yemei hamaseh, between the Shabbos Kodesh, the 7th day of the week, and the 6 days of the week that one's permitted to work. And this separation, this adding on, ben yoim hashvi'i l'sheishes yemei hamaseh, actually seems to be a repetition of the words Hamavdil ben kodesh lechoil. Shabbos is kodesh and the week is choil. And indeed, that is the case, that this Hamavdil, the ben yoim hashvi'i l'sheishes yemei hamaseh, we're going to see soon in the Gemara, is actually a repetition, because we'll soon see why. And that is how Rava said his Havdalah. So he sort of said 4 things: B'kodesh lechoil, ben ola choshech, ben Yisrael la'amim, ben yoim hashvi'i l'sheishes yemei hamaseh. But we'll soon see that really it's just considered 3. He said those 4, and then he finished off the bracha, Baruch Ato Hashem Hamavdil ben kodesh lechoil, and that's very much the way we make our bracha of Hamavdil on Motzei Shabbos. Omerle, so Rabbi Yaakov asked Rava, Lama l'cha kulehai, why do you have to say so many Hamavdils? Why do you have to point out so many separations? Hashem separates and differentiates between Kodesh and Chol, between light and dark, between Yisrael and the nations, between the Yom HaShvi and Sheish Semei HaMaseh. V'omer Rav Yehuda Marav, Hamavdil ben Kodesh l'Chol, Zui Havdalosoi shel Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi just said one. He said, Baruch Ato Hashem, Hamavdil ben Kodesh l'Chol. Just one. Why do you need so many? Omarle. So Rava responded to Rabbi Yaakov bar Abba and said, Ano kahosviruli, I hold like a different opinion. Not like you're saying in the name of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, just a single Hamavdil ben Kodesh l'Chol. Rather, I hold like Rabbi Loza, like Rabbi Oishia more accurately. The Omar Rabbi Loza, Omar Rabbi Oishia, Hapoiseach, somebody who's not familiar with all the times that there's a separation, a differentiation between 2 opposites, and he's only going to say a few of them, lo yivchos migimel, he shouldn't say less than 3. V'amoisif, and if you are familiar and you're going to say more of them, lo yosef al zayin, don't say in your text of Hamavdil more than 7 terms of Havdalah, of separation. Omerle. So Rabbi Yaakov said to Rava, V'omar, but you Rava, lo itlos Omar, you didn't say 3, v'lo sheva Omar, and nor did you say 7. If you're going for the minimum, go for 3. You're going for more than 3, go for 7. Omar le. So Rava responded to Rabbi Yaakov and said, Ibra, indeed, ben yoim hashvi l'sheishes yemei hamaseh, that 4th one, that last one that I said before the chasima, before ending the bracha, is me'en chasima. It's not an extra one. Since we're taken for granted, we'll soon see it's a discussion later, but the Gemara took it for granted, and it is taken for granted, that the way we end the bracha, Baruch Ato Hashem, Hamavdil ben kodesh lechoil, and there's a halacha that the last detail mentioned in the whole long bracha, before the ending of the bracha, the last point has to be similar to the point that's going to be made after saying the final Baruch Ato Hashem. Since the final Baruch Ato Hashem has been Kodesh L'Choil, therefore Rava says, I added on that Hamavdil ben Yom HaShvi L'Sheishes Yemei HaMaseh, which is similar to Kodesh L'Choil. So it's not really a 4th thing. So indeed, all I said, Rava says, is three things: Hamavdil ben kodesh l'choil, ben oil ha'choshech, ben Yisrael lo'amim. And now I want to say, Baruch Ato Hashem, Hamavdil ben kodesh l'choil, but I've just spoken about Yisrael and Amim. I can't just say Hamavdil ben kodesh l'choil. I need to say an extra point at the end, which is going to bring us back to the Hamavdil ben kodesh l'choil. That's why I said the fourth thing. V'omer v'yodama Shmuel Hamavdil tzorich sheyemer me'en chasimo tzorich lechasimosoy. Because, and this is actually a discussion that Rav Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, that when you say a mavdil, the last detail of the bracha has to be similar to the chasimo, to the way we end the hamavdil. And ending a mavdil is Baruch Ato Hashem, a mavdil ben kodesh l'choil. So the last thing you say before that has to be something similar to kodesh l'choil, which is ben Yom HaShvi l'sheish samei ha'maseh. Upumpedisoy omar me'en psichoson samuch lechasimoson. In Pumbedisa, they actually said that the last detail of a long bracha has to be similar to the first detail of that long bracha, and it doesn't need to be similar to the ending of the bracha, but the whole long part of the bracha before the final Baruch Ato Hashem, the first point and the last point have to be similar. And in this case of Rava, it's the same. What was the first thing that Rava mentioned? Hamavdil ben kodesh l'choil. The last thing he said before Baruch Ato Hashem is Ben Yom HaShvi l'sheish samei ha'maseh. So this fourth item, this fourth detail, Hamavdil ben Yom HaShvi l'sheish samei ha'maseh, is also similar to the first point in the long bracha, Hamavdil ben kodesh l'choil, and it's also similar to the chasimo, to the ending of the bracha, Baruch Ato Hashem, Hamavdil ben kodesh l'choil. So either way, Rava did not have an issue, but there are two different opinions whether the last detail of the long part of the bracha, does it have to be similar to the final part of the bracha after Baruch Ato Hashem, or does it have to be similar to the first part of the bracha? Says the Gemara, my beinayu, where are we going to find a halachic, practical difference and ramification to this machlokas? If Motzei Shabbos, you're making Havdalah, but it's not a weekday. Sunday, Motzei Shabbos is a Yom Tov. So then we don't say Baruch Ato Hashem HaMavdil bein kodesh l'choil. You actually say HaMavdil bein kodesh l'kodesh. So now, if we look at this now, so in the regular case of Havdalah, the very first thing mentioned is kodesh l'choil. The very last thing mentioned, Baruch Ato Hashem HaMavdil bein kodesh l'choil. It's the same. So the last detail before that final Baruch Ato Hashem, which is Yom HaShvi l'sheish samei ha'maseh, is indeed similar to the first and last because they're the same. But now that we end off Baruch Ato Hashem HaMavdil bein kodesh l'kodesh, so how does the Havdalah start? It starts HaMavdil bein kodesh l'choil, bein oil ha'choshech, bein Yisrael lo'amim. How does it finish? Baruch Ato Hashem HaMavdil bein kodesh l'kodesh, not bein kodesh l'choil. Here we're going to have an issue. If you say that the last detail of the long part of the bracha has to be the same as its first detail, then it's fine. Just say Hamavdil bein Yom HaShvi l'sheish samei ha'maseh. It's similar to the first point mentioned, kodesh l'choil, and that's enough. The fact that in Baruch Ato Hashem Hamavdil bein kodesh l'kodesh is not relevant. However, according to Pumbedisa, who say, no, that's according to Pumbedisa. However, according to Shmuel, who says that the last part of the big part of the bracha has to be similar to the ending of the bracha, you can't just finish off Ben Yom HaShvi l'sheish samei ha'maseh Baruch Ato Hashem HaMavdil bein kodesh l'kodesh, because Shabbos, Yom HaShvi and sheish samei ha'maseh is not kodesh and kodesh, it's kodesh and choil. That's where we're going to have an issue. The Gemara is going to explain this. The chasimoson, the end of the bracha on Motzei Shabbos, which is Yom Tov, is ben kodesh l'kodesh. So man da'omar me'en psichoson, according to Pumbedisa, says that the last part of the long part of the bracha has to be similar to the first one. Samuch lechasimoson, close to the ending. Before you say Baruch Ato Hashem, it has to be similar to the way you open the bracha. I don't need to add on before saying Baruch Ato Hashem. I don't need to add on saying Ben Kedushas Shabbos li Kedushas Yom Tov Vivdalta. That Hashem makes a separation or a distinction between the Kedusha of Shabbos and the Kedusha of Yom Tov. I don't need that. However, according to Shmuel, who says that the last part of the bracha has to be similar to the chasimo, then you need to add something on. Samuch lechasima. And if it has to be me'en chasima samuch lechasima, boy elemema, you have to add in. After you say, Hamavdil ben kodesh l'chol ben ola choshech ben Yisrael la'amim ben yom hashvi l'sheitzes yimei ha'maaseh, you now have to add on ben kedushas Shabbos l'kedushas Yom Tov ivdalto, that you distinguish between the kedusha of Shabbos and the kedusha of Yom Tov. And now you can say Baruch Ata Hashem Hamavdil ben kodesh l'kodesh. Continues the Gemara. Gufa Omer Beloza Omer Boishia. And this is taking us back to what we saw before at the bottom of Kuf Gimel Amud Beis. Hapoicha is somebody who says just a few of the havdolos, a few of the distinctions that Hashem makes. Lo yivchois, he shouldn't say less mishalosh than 3. And we said that Rava indeed said 3. Kodesh l'choil, or l'choshech, Yisrael la'amim. And Hava Moisif, and if you're going to add, Lo Yosef al Sheva, don't say more than 7 types of distinctions. We can ask a question on this Meisvei from a Braisa. Oimer havdolois b'moitze shabbosos. What a person should say a number of havdolois, of distinctions on Motzei Shabbos. That's when you make havdolah. U'b'motzei yomim tovim, on Motzei Yom Tov you also make havdolah. U'b'motzei yom kippurim, on Motzei Yom Kippur. U'b'motzei Shabbos liYom Tov. Motzei Shabbos, which is a Yom Tov being on Motzei Shabbos, you also make havdolah. U'b'motzei Yom Tov l'chol hamoed. Also you make havdalah. Avaloi b'motzei Yom Tov l'Shabbos. If motzei Yom Tov is Friday night, there you don't say havdalah at all, because you're going from a lesser kedusha to a greater kedusha. You don't make havdalah there. And Harogil, the Brisa says, somebody who's accustomed to the various different distinctions that are mentioned in the Torah, Oimer Harbe, you should say many havdalahs. V'she'einoi rogil, but if you're not so accustomed to them, Oimer Achas, then 1 is enough. Before we saw 3. Here it says in the Brisa, 1 is enough. Either 1 or as many as you can. And this is the question that the Gemara is asking on Rabbi Ishia. Rabbi Ishia says not less than 3. Here it says even 1. Says the Gemara, Tanoi, it's actually a machlokas Tanoim. D'Omer Rabbi Yechanan. Rabbi Yechanan said as follows, Benon shel kadoshim. There was somebody called Reb Menachem bar Simoi. You will soon see why he was called the son of holy people. He was given the title of a holy person. The Benon shel kadoshim, which is one of the Tanoim, Oimer, he says, Achas. Just 1 havdalah is enough. However, the custom of the people was like other Tanoim who argued with this Benon shel kadoshim, and they said, Lo mashalish, you should say 3, like we saw before. According to Rabbi Ishia, you say 3. Man niu Benon shel kadoshim. The Gemara is inquiring, who is this Benon shel kadoshim? Says the Gemara, Reb Menachem bar Simoi. A Tana called Reb Menachem bar Simoi. V'mai korele Benon shel kadoshim. Why was he deserving of this title, Benon shel kadoshim? Says the Gemara, de lo yistakil b'tzuras u'dezuza. He would not gaze at the design, at the form that was pressed into a coin. He was so separated from this world that he wouldn't even distinguish between one coin and the next. That's why he was given this title, Benon shel kadoshim. Sholach lahu Rav Shmuel bar Idi. Rav Shmuel bar Idi sent a message to the Bnei Yeshiva that Hananya Achi, you should know that my brother Hananya, Oimer Achas, he just says 1 havdalah, which is similar to what the Benon shel kadoshim held. V'les hilchasek, I say that halacha is not like them. The halacha is that you say a minimum of 3 havdalos. Continues the Gemara, Omer Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Hamavdil, somebody who makes havdalah, tzarech sheyemar me'en havdalos or amuris b'Torah. He doesn't just say a number, 3, 7, 1. No. He says that you should mention all the havdalos, those distinctions which are explicitly noted and written in the Torah as being distinctions. We'll soon see exactly what they are, but those are the havdalos that should be mentioned. Asks the Gemara Meisvei. There's a brisa that says, say the havdalos heich. How do you say the havdalah? The brach of hamavdil, which distinctions do you mention? Oimer, we say as follows: Hamavdil ben kodesh l'choil ben or l'choshech ben Yisrael lo'amim ben yom hashvi l'sheishes yemei ha'maaseh. And the truth is that it seems from the Rishonim here that these words ben yom hashvi l'sheishes yemei ha'maaseh were put in this over here because whenever you say the minimum of just 3, this is where you say ben yom hashvi l'sheishes yemei ha'maaseh. But the truth is that the place to say this is actually right at the end of the list. What's the continuation of the list? Bein tomei l'tohir, that Hashem who distinguishes between tomei and tohir. Bein hayom l'charova, from sea and dry land. Bein Maim Elyonim leMaim Atachtonim, the upper waters and the lower waters. Bein Kohanim leLevim v'Yisraelim, and Hashem distinguishes between Kohanim, Levim, and Yisraelim. So those are all that, and it seems that there's 7 things that are mentioned here. There's Kodesh L'Chol, Or L'Choshech, Yisrael L'Amim, Tomei Tohir, Yom Charova, Maim Elyonim, Maim Tachtonim, and Kohen Levi Yisrael. That's 7 things. The Yom HaShvi, Sheish Tzimei HaMaseh, is just mentioned at the end because it needs to be mentioned at the end. And how do you finish off? Till now we took it for granted that you always say, Baruch Ato Hashem, HaMavdil ben Kodesh L'Chol, unless it's Yom Tov, and then you say ben Kodesh L'Kodesh. But this Brisa says no. This Brisa says V'choisam b'seider b'reishis. You say Baruch Ato Hashem seider b'reishis. Hashem, who He organized the entire creation. Others say no. You say Baruch Ato Hashem Yotzer b'reishis, the creator of the world. At the beginning of the world, Hashem was the creator. And because it's the end of the week and the beginning of a new week, that's why we associate Hashem as being the creator of the world that was created starting on the first day of the week. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Chosem Mekadesh Yisrael. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda says that now on Motzei Shabbos is the appropriate time to express the Kedusha of Klal Yisrael. And there's a discussion in the Mefarshim why, but that was the third opinion, Mekadesh Yisrael. This is the end of the Brisa. And now the Gemara is asking against Rabbi Shua ben Levi. What did Rabbi Shua ben Levi say? Rabbi Shua ben Levi says that the Havdalos, the distinctions that you mention, should be those mentioned in the Torah. Ve'im Isa asks the Gemara, if Rabbi Shua ben Levi is right, Habeina Yom Lecharava, there's no pasuk in the Torah that says explicitly Hashem distinguishes between sea and land. We know that there's a distinction, but not every distinction that we know about we mention in the bracha. It's only those who are murois b'Torah, where the Torah stresses and says here there's a havdalah. There's no term havdalah used when distinguishing between Yom and Charava. Says the Gemara, you're right. Sami mikan bein Yom lecharava. Remove Yom lecharava from the list. Says the Gemara, if so, ihachi, since ben Yom HaShvi l'sheish yemei HaMaseh, nami me'en chasimahu, since the part that says ben Yom HaShvi l'sheish yemei HaMaseh, which was mentioned in the middle of the Brisa, but as we said, actually belongs at the end of the list. Why do we say that? Just in order to have me'en chasima, in order it should be similar to what you're going to say afterwards, Baruch Ato Hashem, and however you're going to finish the bracha. So that's also not included as an extra one. So then you've lost yet another one. So how many do you have altogether? You have Kodesh L'Chol, Or L'Choshech, Yisrael L'Amim, Tomei Tohir, Maim Elyonim, Maim Tachtonim, which is an explicit pasuk in Parshas Bereishis, and Bein Kohanim Levim and Yisraelim. Well, that's only 6. What about the 7? V'leka Sheva. We said before that the maximum is 7. Where's the 7th? Answers the Gemara, Omri, Kohanim Levim v'Yisraelim Trei Mileninu. Actually, the last thing mentioned, Ben Kohanim Levim Yisraelim, is actually two distinguishes. One distinguishing between Kohanim, between Yisrael and Shevet Levi. Within Shevet Levi, there's a separation between the Kohanim and the Levim. And the Gemara is going to explain, Ben Levim Yisraelim, it says in the pasuk, Bo'esahi Hivdil Hashem as Shevet Levi, as Shevet HaLevi, Lo says it's our own bris Hashem, etc. So there the pasuk says explicitly that the Rabbi Shalom was Hivdil, he separated the Shevet Levi from the rest of Klal Yisrael. Ben Kohanim LeLevim, and between Kohanim and Levim also, it says in another pasuk, Bnei Amram, Aaron u'Moshe vayibodel Aaron lahakdisha kodesh kadoshim hu v'anovad olam. So that it says explicitly that Hashem separated between the Aaron, the Kohanim, from the rest of the Shevet Levi. So that is the 7th distinction. Says the Gemara, Mechtam Ma'echosim. How do you end the bracha of Havdalah? Rav Omar Mekadesh Yisrael, which is like the final Tana in the Brisa. That's we saw. The Rabbi Yehuda said in the Brisa before, he said that you say Mekadesh Yisrael. Shmuel Omar. And Shmuel said, Shmuel actually doesn't hold like any of the Tanoi mentioned in that Brisa. Not Seder Bereishis, and not Yotzer Bereishis, and not Mekadesh Yisrael. What does he say? He says, Amavdil ben Kodesh L'Chol. And the Rashbam here explains that there is a Tana who holds this way, and it's the Tana who says that between Shabbos and Yom Tov you say Hamavdil ben Kodesh leKodesh, obviously holds that on Motzei Shabbos you say ben Kodesh leChol. He has another Tana. Says the Gemara, Lait alo Abaya ve'iteimer of Yosef v'hod Rav. Abaya actually very seriously disagreed with what Rav says, that you make a bracha Mekadesh Yisrael. And there's a discussion, what bothered Abaya so much with saying it, what's the issue, and the Mefarshim discuss it. Continues the Gemara, Tonim Eshmeidu Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya, Kol HaChoisem Mekadesh Yisrael, V'amavdil ben Kodesh L'Chol. If you actually adhere to both opinions, and you say Baruch Ato Hashem Mekadesh Yisrael V'amavdil ben Kodesh L'Chol, Marichin Lo Yomov V'Shnoisov, it's a skula for a person to get long days and long years. However, the halacha is not like that, and Tosfos here brings that the reason is, and Rashbam says the same, that we know from Brachas Daf Mem Tes that you never finish off a bracha with two topics. You only ever mention, after the final Baruch Ato Hashem, you only mention one thing, either Mekadesh Yisrael or Amavdil ben Kodesh L'Chol. Continues the Gemara. Ulla ikla Pumpadisa. Ulla chanced upon, was visiting a place of Pumpadisa. Omar le Rav Yehuda le Rav Yitzchok berei. Rav Yehuda said to his son Rav Yitzchok, you know who's just come to Pumpadisa? Ulla's just come. Zil, go to Ulla. We need some excuse. You need an excuse to get into Ulla. You can't just go and observe what he's doing. No. So you know what? Amtile, bring him kalkola de beira. Bring him, so to speak, as a gift, a basket of fruits. That way you'll have an entranceway into Ulla. And whilst you're there, v'chozi, have a look, heicha avdil. Let's see what he does. What did Ulla used to do? How did he make Havdalah? Lo ozal. And the truth is, Rav Yehuda, that Rav Yitzchok, the son of Rav Yehuda, didn't actually go himself. Shadar leila Abaya. Instead of him going, he sent Abaya to go and see what Ulla was, how he was going to make Havdalah. Ki asa Abaya. When Abaya came back, then Rabbi Yitzchok asked Abaya, Omar le, heicha Omar, how did Ulla make Havdalah? Omar le. Abaya told Rabbi Yitzchok, Baruch HaMavdil ben Kodesh L'Chol. He just said one thing, like we saw before. There's an opinion like that. He just said, Baruch HaMavdil ben Kodesh L'Chol. Omar, that's all he said. V'suloi, and he didn't say any more than that. Also lekamei davua. So Rabbi Yitzchok went back to his father, Rabbi Yehuda. Omar le, and his father asked him, heicha Omar. No, you went to Ulla? What did Ulla say? Omar le. So actually, Rabbi Yitzchok said to his father, Rabbi Yehuda, he says, Ano le ozle. The truth is, I didn't go. Ano shadr se la Abaya. I sent Abaya to go. V'omar li, and Abaya came back and told me that what Ulla said was, Amavdil ben Kodesh L'Chol. That's all he said. Omar le. Rav Yehuda said to his son Rabbi Yitzchok angrily, he certainly had some reservation against that. Rav Ranusei Demar, V'Sararusei Demar, whether it's your haughtiness or your not wanting to, you're rebelling against what I told you to do. You're refusing to go and observe Ulla. Gormale caused Lamar to you, Rabbi Yitzchok, because from now on, for the eternity, whenever this halacha of Ulla is said over, it's going to be said in the name of Abaya. That Abaya saw Ulla doing Havdalah like this, and had you gone, Rabbi Yitzchok, people would have said that Rabbi Yitzchok said this in the name of Ulla. And we know the Gemara says, and Rashbam brings this here, that when Divrei Torah are said in a person's name, that even after he passes away, then his lips, so to speak, they utter these divrei Torah even in the grave, and you've lost this opportunity. Continues the Gemara. Meisvei, we're actually going to ask a question. How can Ulla just say, Baruch HaMavdil ben Kodesh L'Chol? We know that an average long bracha starts with Baruch Ato Hashem, and says a whole list of details and items, and at the end it finishes off Baruch Ato Hashem with a chasima. How can you have a bracha with just Baruch Ato Hashem and that's it? And we're going to ask a question from this. Kol ha-brachos kulon peseach bebaruch v'chosim ben bebaruch. The standard bracha is that you start off with Baruch Ato Hashem and you again come back to Baruch Ato Hashem at the end. Besides, chutz mibirchas ha-mitzvahs, besides for making a bracha on a mitzvah, where the whole concept text of the bracha is just a single point, Baruch Ato Hashem Elokeinu melech ha'olam asher kitshanu mitzvos v'tzivonu al netilas yadayim, al netilas lulav, wherever it may be, you don't need to come back to anything. Ubirchas haperos, the same is true. Baruch Ato Hashem Elokeinu melech ha'olam b'orei pri ha'etz. You're only mentioning one point, and therefore you don't need to say Baruch again. Ubracha hasmucha lechaverta, or even if it's a longer bracha, but if it's close by, if it's near to a previous bracha that has Baruch Ato Hashem at the end, then you don't need, or has Baruch Ato Hashem, then the Baruch Ato Hashem at the end of the previous bracha is in place of the Baruch Ato Hashem at the beginning of the next bracha. You don't need to start with Baruch Ato Hashem. For example, all the brachas of our Shemona Esra, they don't all start with Baruch Ato Hashem. The first one starts Baruch Ato Hashem and finishes off Baruch Ato Hashem Mogen Avram, and then you say Ato Gibayr. That bracha finishes with Baruch Ato Hashem Mechaya Mesim, and you say Ato Kodesh. And you don't, if it's Smucha Lechaverta, you don't need to start with Baruch. Or bracha Achrona Shebekriyas Shema, and the last bracha of Kriyas Shema, even though it's not the bracha of Vayatziv after Shema, it doesn't start with Baruch, and it's not just adjacent to a Baruch just before it. And there's a reason for that, and that is because the Shema is an annex, so to speak, of the previous bracha before the Shema, and therefore it's annexed to that. It's a discussion in the Mefarshim. But either way, besides for all these cases, every other bracha, as the Mishnah starts, Kol ha-brachis kulon peseach b'baruch v'chosim b'baruch. So how can Ulas just say the bracha of Havdalah, Baruch Ato Hashem, hamavdil ben kodesh l'chol? Also, the Mishnah carries on that besides for that, this list of exceptions we just mentioned, yesh men peseach b'baruch ve'in chosim b'baruch. Some start with Baruch but don't finish with Baruch. For example, the birchas hamitzvos and the birchas haperos. V'yesh men shechosim b'baruch ve'in peseach b'baruch. You have some who they have Baruch at the end, not at the beginning. Like we said, all those brachas has smuchos lechaverta v'atoy v'ametiv. And the fourth bracha of Birchas Hamazon, even though we finished the third bracha, Baruch Ato Hashem, Boinei Baracham of Yerushalayim, Amen, nonetheless, the next bracha immediately starts with Baruch Ato Hashem, and the fourth bracha of Atov HaMeitiv starts with the Baruch. And that's Ve'enei Chosim B'Baruch. That's also an exception. And the reason it's an exception is because it was a bracha that was instated on its own. It was not necessarily to do with Birchas Hamazon. It was just they wanted to praise Hashem for Hatov HaMeitiv, for the people who were killed in Narugei Beita. They were allowed to, they didn't rot until they were buried, and then there was another chesed that they were allowed to be buried. And we made a separate bracha for that. So Hatov HaMeitiv is Peseach B'Baruch Ve'enei Chosim B'Baruch. But any other, besides for all these exceptions, all the brachas start with Baruch and finish with Baruch. Kashya le'ula. It's a question on Ula. Answers the Gemara, Omar lecha Ula. Ula says that this bracha of Havdalah, being that the content of the bracha is just a single point, and there's no hefsek in the middle. You're not saying a number of points, Baruch Ato Hashem, and then saying a whole string of points, and then you have to come back and finish off with Baruch Ato Hashem. And Rashi brings here that, for example, with Kiddush, you speak all about Shabbos inside the Kiddush, so you have to say Baruch Ato at the end as well. Yotzei, you speak. There's tchinos. We have requests. We ask from Hashem. Berachamecha Rabim. Birchas Ovis. Rashi brings that all the other brachas are longer brachas. Whenever there's a longer bracha with a number of points mentioned in the bracha, you start with Baruch and you finish with Baruch. However, over here, where he's just making Havdalah, Baruch Ato Hashem, Amavdil ben Kodesh L'chol. There's no reason I need to finish off with a Baruch. Ha nami kabirchas hamitzvos damya is similar to birchas hamitzvos. Birchas hamitzvos ma'itama. Why do any birchas hamitzvos al netilas lulav, al netilas yadayim? Why do they not need a bracha at the end? Bishum dohi dohi. It's just a single praise to Hashem, and that's all you're saying, a single praise. Ha nami hoidohi. Here too, I'm just giving a praise to Hashem. Baruch Ato Hashem, Elokeinu melech ha'olam, hamavdil ben kodesh l'chol. I'm praising you, Hashem, for the fact that you distinguish between Kodesh, which is Shabbos, and the weekdays, and therefore it's not necessary to finish the bracha with a second Baruch. And in Yirtzeh Hashem, in the next shiur, we're going to continue from here.